Hey everyone, I'm so excited to share this episode of the Building Thinkers podcast with you. I talked with Chris Skees, a learning product manager at Cisco Meraki, and we had a wonderful conversation focused on one of my 12 favorite problems. How might we put the learner at the center of the learning conversation? In this case, the learners for Chris and his team are Meraki customers. And so we talk about what it means to put the customer at the center of the learning conversation and the simple power of talking to your learner and finding out what they need and then building that. We also explore what a product mindset is and how it can transform the way learning and development professionals approach their work. I can't wait for you all to learn alongside us in this episode. And so, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Chris Skees. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by
Chris Skees.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us. I think today we're going to talk all things, how might we truly put the learner at the center of the learning conversation? So this is one of my 12 favorite problems, and it's one of the things we'll be zooming in on. I think we'll be talking too about the product manager mindset and all of the things that you've learned in that area. And so, Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
We're going to get right into it. And I'd love, Chris, if you'd start with giving us a little bit of your story. What is it that you're currently building and a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, so I build technical training as a learning product manager at Cisco Meraki. So let's kind of break that down and I can tell you kind of how I got here. I was a content and marketing person out of college. So I did that for a few years. I loved reading and writing. I worked in publishing. And then within a few years, I had this really great opportunity to join a learning startup. So I started as a content developer, which is kind of a unique role in L&D. It's focused on content, writing, editing, SME feedback, right? Building courses. So I got to do a little bit of everything. Was at that startup for 3 years, and then we were acquired by a large global training vendor. So went from a pretty small startup to being part of a really big company. But it was a great experience overall because at that company, I got to work with lots of different clients across lots of different sectors, right? And types of projects and subject matter. So everything from tech to finance and banking to healthcare and even manufacturing. So got to really work with a lot of people, build my skills, go from being a content developer to more of a team lead on projects. And then from there being a frontline people manager. So I was a people manager for about 2.5 years, led a team of content developers. So then I actually kind of realized, oh, wow, like I've been at this company for 10 years now, like a decade, you know? And so I just started to kind of look around and say, what might be next for me or what might I want to do next to keep growing? And so, yeah, about 2.5 years ago, I kind of lifted my head up and looked around and I found this really great role at Cisco Meraki, which is where I am now. So for about 1.5 years, 2 years, I was a learning content manager. So I focused more on platforms and processes, getting all of our teams kind of on the same page and working together in the same, repeatable, high quality, consistent process to build learning. And then about, 8 months ago, I joined our product management team, which is a really interesting role now, moving more a little bit into strategy, working more with the business and the stakeholders to understand their needs, thinking about talking to our learners, right? Understanding their needs, and then thinking about the third point there of like our team and our capabilities. So a lot of what I do is kind of triangulate those three things and that distill that down into a nice product roadmap, which shows, here's what we're working on and here are our priorities for the upcoming quarters so that everyone's on the same page about what we're doing and what we're building.
Wow, that's incredible. I'd like to clarify who your current learners are in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a product enablement department. So basically that means we're doing a lot of customer education. Okay. So primarily end users and customers and partners as well, because we have a lot of technical partners who help deploy and sell our products as well. So really digging into like the customer use cases, the different kind of sectors that they're in, right? And focusing in on how are they using our products, how are they getting value, how are they getting up and running, and then like the day-to-day operations of how do they actually operate our networking systems, like what do they do if they run into an issue, how do they think about all those deployments across their networks. And that's everything from, like retail, small mom and pop coffee shops, all the way up to huge, global enterprises with multiple campuses spread across the world. So we really work with all of those segments. So it's really kind of an interesting audience and some interesting challenges.
Ooh. So when I think about that audience, I already have a natural curiosity here connected to the how might we really put the learner at the center of the learning conversation. When you have learners that you just described as so many different potential people, from the mom and
Mm-hmm.
pop shop to large global organization, everything in between, how do you even start with that? How do you like to think about it? You mentioned some of the strategy components that you're involved in now too, and kind of this triangulation between the customer and business, all of those pieces. So can you give us insight into how you think about the learner and where you start?
Absolutely. So, coming from a product management or a UX experience design lens, really kind of thinking about our customers and segmentation, and then thinking about personas as well, right? And so, one of the kind of the fundamental concepts of personas is you want to organize them by, where do you see commonality across these groups, right? And so, what are their needs? What are their use cases? What are the things that they run into? And you'll find a lot of times that even though they might be in very different kind of environments or situations, that we'll see these kind of natural groupings emerge of people who are really focused on troubleshooting, or maybe people who are really focused on deployment. And a lot of those kind of concepts are really foundational, and everyone needs to know those. And so we organize by personas and think about personas a lot, and kind of have developed a series of personas that help us and our learning teams really understand, like, who are we targeting with this training, and what's important to them? Like, what do they value? What does their workday look like? Like, what are the problems they encounter? So we try to keep like at least a primary and a secondary persona in mind. So that's one way we think about it. And then really thinking about like meeting people where they are, and having these kind of like levels or paths through our learning, right? So we have everything from, I'm brand new and I just need like an introduction and a basic understanding, to kind of like fundamentals, and then building on funnels with more advanced content. So really organizing our portfolio in a way that no matter where you are in your networking journey, we have something to offer you. And then it's about connecting those learners and those persona types to the learning that's going to match kind of their journey and where they're at. So yeah, it's really an exciting challenge.
I love this. Maybe for some of so we have a lot of listeners who are in the L&D space. They know what a persona is, or they've done UX and things like that. But maybe for somebody that hasn't, because I think there's like two sides of this. Sometimes I think it's utilized a lot. In other places, I think it has so much potential, but people haven't tapped into it. Can you give a brief description of what a persona is, and maybe also even how do you know how many personas to develop to get to that idea of, you said you have 1 to 2 that are kind of in the back of your mind, but did you start with more and narrow down? Maybe a little bit of that side.
Sure. So, a persona is almost like an archetype, right? Of a group that, a persona represents a group of learners essentially for us. So a good example might be, like we talked about, like a mom and pop shop, or like kind of like a do-it-yourself, right? This is someone who is kind of new to networking and is just starting to understand all of these kind of basic concepts. So we kind of think about, okay, what does that person need? And approach it that way. But what's really been exciting in the last few months is we've added an actual researcher to our team. So a lot of times, and in the past, like, teams will develop these personas and they're loosely connected to data. But what we've done in the past 6 months is really get rigorous about going out, getting appropriate sample sizes of learners from all over the world, from all different segments, and actually sitting down and talking to them. Right. And so when you talk to them and have these conversations and start to gather data, then you start to see kind of these patterns emerge. Right. And so there's many ways to organize personas. It could be, their experience level. It could be their kind of daily tasks. It could be where they sit in an organization. And so that's kind of different, right, for your learning needs. And so once you start to see those patterns emerge, though, and you group them together, you can say, okay, here are some different ways to think about these broad kind of archetypes or types of learners that we're encountering. So, I think an organization of our size, you might have 5 to 10 different primary personas that you're thinking about. But when we get down to like a project level, we really want to have like a primary audience in mind. So we don't want to try to meet the needs of everyone, because then you kind of don't meet the needs of anyone, right? And so we want to think, okay, who is the persona we're working with? What does that group look like? Like, what are their common challenges, and how do we really target those in this learning. So like a practical thing you might think about would be like level of technical knowledge. Like, do we need to explain some of these concepts? Or at this persona level, they should have this baseline understanding where we don't need to explain all these fundamental concepts. We can just throw them out and keep going, right? Assuming that they already have that level of knowledge.
This is making me think about, sometimes we overcomplicate it, right? We think it needs, a ton. So there is the rigorous side of the research itself, but also you said, like, just talk to the learners. There's this piece that gets overcomplicated there, where if we're a company organization that's removed from those learners and we're guessing, just go talk to them. And so
Yeah.
I think that I've also seen that to be true. And maybe my question here is, what have you seen maybe in different roles where that does get overcomplicated? What is kind of that, if only people knew when it comes to this area of learning for you?
Yeah, I'm really big on like if people only knew like how enlightening it is to sit down and actually talk to customers, right? Or talk to learners or talk to end users. I mean, it's one thing to have them be a data point and to gather data, but it's another thing to have that like human connection, right? To like look them in the eye, hear their voice, like build a relationship. And so it's so enlightening. And it's easy to overcomplicate this stuff, but I'm telling you, if you go out and talk to 5 to 10, of your target learner audience, like within 5 to 10 conversations, you will start to see patterns. No matter if you have a background in research or not, like you will notice, okay, these people are talking about the same things, and these two other people are talking about the same things too, and they're different things. And that those patterns will really just emerge. So, if you have a background in research, that's great. And if you don't, I still encourage you to go out and just talk to these learners. Then you get these voices in your head, right? So when you go to make decisions or make design decisions, like you're thinking of actual people that you've talked to, you can hear their voice, you kind of know their need. And I think taking it to the next level is actually doing these in person. So I had this awesome experience last summer to go to this, Cisco Live, which is our large kind of conference and trade show that we do each year. And we actually sat down with 100 learners over 3 days. So this is face to face at a laptop station where they're pulling up our learning hub and actually looking at it right in front of us. And we're just talking through it person to person. And it is so enlightening. And we learned so much so quickly. I mean, I think in those 3 days, I learned more than maybe my previous year research combined, right?
Yeah. So why do you think we don't do that? Why is that not the norm? Why does it get overcomplicated?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. And I have a couple theories, and one of them is that, a lot of us in L&D have really great experience, right? We have advanced degrees and all kinds of like theoretical knowledge around how people learn. And I think we view ourselves as the experts, right? And rightly so. However, I think that we kind of develop this mindset where we know what's best for learners. We know what they need, right? And based on our research and our theory and all this technical background that we have, we know what the learners need, maybe better than they know themselves, right? However, I think we have to stay humble, right? And we have to actually go out and validate that. And so maybe you have a few conversations and everything you thought is completely validated. And that's great, right? That's still time well spent because you have a higher confidence level. Like you're really confident that what you thought was true is actually true. But so many times when I go out and actually talk to learners, at least half my assumptions were not quite right. And they were, they're not completely off base, but they're not quite dialed in or attuned to what, people are actually thinking about. And so I think going through that process can really both kind of change like how we're thinking about things and like raise that empathy and that human at the other, end of the learning experience, but also like boost our confidence that we've talked to learners. We're not just experts in learning, but we're advocates for our learners. We can speak for them and advocate for them. So when we have these business stakeholders or these other clients or whoever you're working with coming to you saying, oh, I would like to see this and I would like to see that. Well, we have actual learners, right, that we've talked to who we can represent in those conversations and say, I've talked to these people. This is what they're looking for, right? And it's a little bit different than what you're describing. So let's dig into that and figure out why that's different.
This idea of putting the learner at the center, I think is of course connected to humility, that if they are the center, then our role is, to your point, to support them with what they need. That is why we're there. That's why our role exists. And I think that there is this piece that, because of maybe our experience, because of like our role and the way that we see it, it is sometimes a shift in thinking to recognize, where the insight can come from to help us make the best learning experience possible. That insight doesn't need to come from like another book or another degree. It can come right
Mm.
there from the people that we intend to serve. And I do think that sometimes it maybe gets off track because we're trying to almost please too many people. It is challenging to
Mm.
manage and be in between the business and the learner. Maybe it's ongoing learning for those of us in the L&D space to take that step back and not get maybe caught in the weeds of our own identity and our own need to be seen as the expert to kind of move that forward. I don't
Mm.
know. Have you seen any of that to be true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And what you're describing completely resonates with me in my experience in our industry. So much of L&D is really like consulting in disguise. You know, you go in and someone thinks they need one thing, and then you dig in, you start asking questions, and you realize like, okay, like we're bringing people together and talking about this, even within a company, and people might think they all need different things, right? And so you're really bringing these people together, having conversations about what we need to accomplish, and then trying to figure out the best way to do that. And a lot of times that's different from what they originally thought, and that's a good thing, right? Like you're showing them value.
I love to ask the question about, is there something that maybe you used to not know how to do that now you know how to do? This idea of potential and the ways that we learn and grow ourselves. And I'm curious if you have a story or insight around that.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of growth lately around research, and really realizing, and I think this is really important in learning and design and like our analysis phase of like trying to get to like a specific
Mm.
hypothesis, right? Of if I build this solution or we implement this kind of training, like what do we think will
Ooh.
happen? You know, and really like getting better at sharpening that up of saying like, how are we actually going to engage with learners? What's the behavior change or outcome that we expect, and like how are we going to measure that, right? And I know like I've done many projects that did not really dig into that early on, and a lot of times too you'll see projects where you try to measure at the end, right? Like, oh, okay, we need to
Mm-hmm.
evaluate what we're doing. But for me, I'm really been like focusing lately on how do we start with a hypothesis, right? And like have this really specific thing that we think that if we build this learning or this training, we can accomplish X or Y. And then kind of like holding ourselves accountable. Like let's figure out how we're going to measure that. And then let's come back to that at, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and see, are we actually seeing like, was our hypothesis correct? And if not, what do we need to do differently, right? Or what can we change next time? Or how do we iterate and make this solution better? And so really thinking about it as it's not necessarily this all
Mm-hmm.
in, we have to solve this in one go right at a time. It's really having that like iterative mindset of like, let's have a hypothesis, let's put something out there, let's see what the actual data says, let's see what the results are, and then let's change it up. Like let's iterate on it and let's identify where maybe we were off a little bit, and let's make those changes and see like, so it's really that product mindset that we're not just putting this learning out there and wishing people well and coming back in 6 months and measuring it, but seeing those iterative changes and seeing how that changes the outcomes, right? And trying to get constantly better and better.
Mm. I very much resonate with that approach and think you articulated it so clearly. And I'm seeing now the more we talk, that product mindset. I also come from a product
Mm.
background. I was the co founder of an ed tech app in kind of my early mid 20s and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
learned a little bit of trial by fire, UX and managing
Yeah.
programmers and all of that. And so I think that I didn't even realize it, but that was the way I then approached learning, because I was like, of course it's a prototype. Of course we're going to try it. Of course we're going to measure
Mm-hmm.
things. And then I realized that that wasn't what was happening around me. And people speak to this so often. I see all the time on LinkedIn, we have to measure, but I see very few examples of it happening. I would say consistently, even in like large organizations in which you would think it would be a necessity, if we're going to spend X dollars, that we would have very clear metrics. But these metrics seem to me, not everywhere, but a lot of times behind the times, and they're still stuck in how many people attended a train, like literally the butts and seats versus can the people do the thing that you want them to be able to do by the end of this?
Right.
And so I hear, in that flow, this idea of the hypothesis, and then, measuring, is it doing what we set out to do, and refining it. One of the questions there, because you made such a beautiful like through line of that process, what does it look like when the metrics don't come back as you intended, perhaps, to then refine and change course? How have you learned that piece of the taking what you see from those metrics and making the next iteration?
Yeah, I mean that's where the rubber kind of hits the road, right? And that's where the commitment comes in, because you test kind of your resolve as a team and your leadership and kind of stakeholder resolve too, where you say we want to go back after 3 or 6 months and actually revise this, right? And so how do you make the case that that's a priority? And so I think it's, if you to continue on the metric point as well, like if you have the metrics in mind when you're kicking off the project, that really helps you go into this like backwards design mindset, right? Of like, we know what we want to achieve and we can design for that. And so I think when you're not seeing the results you expected, it's looking at the hypothesis and then thinking like, is this an execution problem? And digging in, and that's where the data can be really helpful. So I think an example of that might be if you're not seeing like let's say you wanted to do something to drive down, support cases, since we're talking about customer education, right? So maybe it's digging into what are the most important or common support cases you're seeing, and then seeing after we release this training internally or externally, like, are we seeing less, cases going to our internal help desk on this product? And then measuring that and saying, okay, was that hypothesis valid? And maybe we're seeing different support cases, right, in different topics or different components. And so it's at that point, it's almost like a whack-a-mole where it's like, okay, we've had the effect, right? But now we're seeing these come, and that's where you really have that product mindset of these like trends, right? That it's not a once and done, that maybe the learning needs are then shifting, right? And so maybe that sets you up for your next project. Maybe it's an iteration. And just kind of going back and thinking like, how can we improve this? And then thinking, how can we build upon this with our next piece of the puzzle, right? And so it tells you a lot about your products as well. And that's why I love that we're in the product kind of organization, because these things are one and the same. If you're releasing a product, you're supporting a product or a platform, right? And you're seeing this increased needs for learning and training and support cases, like that goes back to the product, right? So it's kind of like you can solve that afterwards by training people, but you can also relay this information back to the product team and try to, okay, how can we improve the design, or how can we improve the service that we're offering people, right? To kind of circle back. So it's a work in progress, right? And so we're not just iterating on the solutions, but we're iterating on our processes as well. And I think it's just being curious and open and continuing to try to get better. And if you have that mindset, like, going back to that hypothesis and like, building a new hypothesis can really help just keep you moving in the right direction.
Chris, when you're talking about the feedback there to the products team, and this might be kind of specific for our folks that are in this space, but I do know we have, we had an episode that in season 1 that was in the same space, and we were talking about this connection with the product team. I'm curious how you approach getting that feedback back to the product team that really owns it. Is there an internal mechanism that is already in place for you all to bring that?
Yeah, I mean, we always are trying to build relationships with product teams. So a lot of times we think of the product teams as our subject matter experts internally. And so they're kind of partnering with us. And so by having those relationships, and I think that's what it's about, is like building those relationships over time where you have this open dialogue back and forth. But we can pull them in and say, okay, here's what we're seeing in terms of learning needs, and they can really see what we're producing, right, in terms of learning and support and training. But I think they can then take that information back to their teams. And so a lot of times we're connected with a product manager, right? So they're thinking about prioritization and new features and updates. And so when they're reviewing our learning, they're not just providing us feedback on, okay, I would like to see it, focused on this feature or this, firmware release, but then they're really seeing, okay, this is where we're having to train and add additional support. This is where people are getting stuck in the product, and they're seeing that kind of being surfaced as part of our training. So it does create that feedback loop, and it's about kind of the relationship, right? And so it's, some of those conversations are one way, but most of them, we want them to be these two-way conversations where we're learning from our product SMEs and they're learning from us, and then, taking that back to their team and really helping to prioritize, okay, here's what we can focus on next to really eliminate these at the source, right? Because in a perfect world, we really wouldn't need product training or enablement because the products would be so intuitive. Every single person could figure them out, right? And until we get to that kind of utopia, we're going to need enablement on some level, but we can always keep working towards that goal of intuitive design.
So from both of these angles of course, improving the product, improving the user experience, and supporting people as they are learning to grow from both sides of that. I want to go back to metrics a little bit more for those in the learning space that are thinking about whether you are the one hiring somebody to come in and do the training or it's internal. How do you like to think about those metrics that you would propose, more people are considering, anything around that?
Yeah. When you're working with the business, or, I say the business, but business stakeholders, right? You always want to speak their language. You don't really want to speak the language of L&D, right? So they don't really care about course completion rates. They don't care about Kirkpatrick level 1 or level 2, right? That language doesn't resonate with them. They don't understand it. They don't use it when they talk to each other. So if we try to come in as the learning expert and start talking about these things and these metrics, they just don't care, And so it's really trying to dig in and understand, what is the language they're speaking? What are their goals? What are their, KPIs or OKRs? What do those metrics look like for them? And then it's trying to figure out, okay, how do we make that connection between these metrics that are really important to them and what we can do in terms of learning and training? And so often I hear L&D practitioners focused on output metrics, right? So we did this output, we have the solution. And so it's like you said, it's butts and seats, or, it's satisfaction with the experience. And that's an output metric. I think more and more and more I hear business stakeholders are interested in these outcome metrics, right? Not what did you produce, but what is the result of what you produced, right? And this is tricky, right? There is no magic wand. This stuff takes work, and this is kind of the holy grail of L&D is actually showing those connection points to those business outcomes, right? And it's not easy, but I think when you do the work and you can come to the table with those stakeholders and speak their language and make a case for how what you're doing in learning and in development is helping move those bigger business metrics, you're really going to get their attention, right? You're going to become more of an advisor, right? Because they're going to understand that you're speaking their language, and less so of an order taker where they feel like they just have to tell you what they need, right? Because you're there as a peer at the table. So that's a big mindset shift for me, is away from kind of output metrics to outcome metrics, because that's what the stakeholders are looking for.
Yes, that language reminds me of Kathy Moore's process of map it. And I think, within that, I'll put that in the episode description. I think I've probably mentioned it several times, back there in the yellow section. But that idea of, I think it was her originally that had kind of that idea of the pizza order taker. Did that come from her? I think so. We'll look it up later and we'll fact check. But instead of that, just pizza order taker, and I'm going to deliver a session on this. Really, everything we've been talking about, from the needs assessment to understanding the customer to understanding the business, speaking their language, and being able to almost be like a translator between these different areas and the different people involved to ultimately get to a learning experience that puts the learner at the center, which should align to the business. Because if in your case, since that learner is the person using the product, more learners that understand their product equals happier customers, more engaged customers, likely, there's all sorts of metrics, I'm sure, around that of, return customers when they know how to use it and things like that. And vice versa, if they're frustrated, losing people along the way, or people not seeing the full value of the product that they have. And so I think this idea of the metrics, I hope this is an area that we will continue as people in the L&D space to push forward and to hold each other even like a little bit more, maybe accountable is the wrong word, but just like we can do better here. And so I think as, of course, technology continues to evolve, there's no reason not to really spend the time on the front end, getting the hypothesis, to your point, strengthened and clear, and having metrics that align to telling us what we actually need to know, which is not how many people came. That is one metric, but can they do the thing that our hypothesis says, we want them to be able to do? And then many times when I'm working in organizations, I might also add, like, can it go back to their real life? Can it go back to their job? So not only can they pass some assessment, which there's some value of that, can you demonstrate that you can do a skill? But I also want to know often, do you actually take that skill back and like integrate it into your life, where then I know we're getting to retrieval and long-term memory and all of that stuff. So it becomes something usable beyond this session that you came to.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's where you're getting into solid learning design, right? And I love scenarios for that, right? Of actually dropping learners into something that looks a lot like their day-to-day, job responsibilities, and having them make decisions, right? And having them actually take something that they've learned and then like, let's act on it. Like, now that you've learned this, how would you approach the situation? What would you do? And I think that's one really cool thing working on a technology product is we can do demos and labs, right? So we can actually drop them into an environment and they can go into the platform and say, okay, how would I do this? Like, where would I go to change this? Or how would I troubleshoot this? And so we can kind of try to like blend those together and really meet them in the product, like in the flow of work more and more, right? And so we don't want training to be in one silo over here in the product and a different silo. More and more, we want to bring that enablement to the product, right? And have those blended, right? And that's what's really interesting about AI and some of the things that companies are doing out there more and more is putting this enablement in their products, right? So that you don't have to leave the environment and go learn about it somewhere else. It's how do we meet them where they are and kind of anticipate, okay, if you're at this page in the product or you're at this point in a process, what's the learning or the enablement you need for where you are right there? And I think that's where AI is really doing some really interesting things about, okay, we know where this person is. What is their need right now? Can we anticipate that? Can we push something their way? And so, yeah, there's some really interesting kind of thought experiments going on in there.
Ooh. Do you want to expand at all upon what you think maybe some of the future of learning and development looks like? What are you maybe most excited about, or anything around the future of learning there?
Yeah. One thing I've been really fascinated by is just, engaging in LinkedIn, listening to podcasts, reading what people are doing, is this kind of connection with learning and development and marketing, actually, right? So like, I think what we share, one of the things we share is like a desire to like change or influence behaviors, right? So marketing has gotten very sophisticated at this, right? If you have these funnels, you know where people are in their journey, right? You know where they are in their consideration, and you know when a nudge here, right, or sending them here, a reminder here is really going to push them on that marketing journey. And of course, the purpose of that is to make a sale, right? However, if we think about that with learning, it's like, where is someone in this process or in this funnel of engaging with our service or our product or our platform, right? Where are they in that journey? And just in the same way, marketing can kind of say, okay, we know that they've shown, interest in this product, or they've downloaded this lead magnet, they're interested in this subject. Like, where can we push them or kind of anticipate, right? And focus on that behavior change. How do we keep nudging them along to where we want them to go, which is, to get more value from our product, or to, not need as many support cases and to be able to figure things out on their own. Like, where are they in that journey, and where can we keep supporting them, kind of in like an outbound way, even like not just waiting for them to come to us and engage with training, but can we anticipate what they might need and push learning content out to them based on, where they are in their experience.
Ooh, that is so powerful. I agree. One of the things that comes to mind is how much more efficient that is. First of all, if you can get there. I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff that has to happen to get there. Um, how much more aligned it is to natural motivation and curiosity and need. I have an activity I do with folks. I have this learning agility cohort, and it's a like 4-week immersive learning experience. And one of the things that we do in that, there's like these series of sliders, and people take different things that they think they want as their learning priority and they analyze them. So imagine there's like a table of 6 different learning priorities, because it's all about like multi-potentialites, people that have lots of different ideas and stuff. How do you quiet the noise and figure out what you really need to learn at this point in your life and career and all that, right? Okay, so that's the background. So in this, I chose 3 different lenses to think about these learning priorities: necessity, feasibility, and curiosity. And I chose those based on, like learning theory, but also, curiosity and motivation as a piece of that, because then we're going to tap into that natural potential that we already have, natural interest. But then there's also real life and the necessity. How important is this to me? How much is this on like my front burners or whatever? And then how feasible is it? We need to be realistic about, it's different to say, I want to learn a language than it is to learn like one specific learning algorithm or something. And so it's been interesting to watch people go through that experience and the different ahas they have when they look at it from those different lenses. And that's just making me think about, you really pull those together. And we do have the technology at this point to be able to do this. To your point on marketing, we know, how customers are interacting with content. So we can know how learners are interacting with learning content. And I do think there's some places where they're doing this, but it will be interesting to see how those things come together. I'm curious of your feedback on that, on those like levers.
Yeah. It's really powerful, right? Because what you're reminding me of is like we can like personalize or make kind of like adaptive learning, right? To meet someone where they are. And the more that we can do that, I think the more value they're going to get from the experience, and the more they're going to want to keep going, right? And learn more. So it becomes kind of this flywheel, right? Where they're having a positive experience. We're meeting where they are. We're personalizing to what's important to them, right? What's feasible for them, what meets matching up with their natural curiosity and what's necessary, right? And then we're keeping them like coming back for more. And the more that they do with us, the more we learn about those things, right? So the more personalized we can get. So yeah, it's a really interesting like flywheel where it's just a great outcome for everyone involved.
Yeah, I'm always trying to think about, how can we make learning irresistible? Can we make learning like Netflix, where you're binge learning, using the dopamine hit in the right way for what we want? So there's an author, John Acuff, and he says, making progress towards your goals is hard because Netflix is easy. But then I think when you make learning easy, not really easy, but fun, and dare I say fun, and motivating, and actually take the learner's needs and interest into consideration, then we do get that personalization. And I really believe there's exponential power in people. And I'm really interested in, how do we unleash that potential? Like, what stands in the way of any of that? I'm curious, anything else you want to hit on in connection to what else we can do to put the learner at the center that you might share?
I have really been leaning into the product mindset and thinking of a learner as like a user, right? Or as a customer. And that's been a big mindset shift for me, because a lot of L&D can be internal, right? And you kind of force people to take this. So it's a lot of stick, right? But what I love about product enablement, customer education, is that it's all carrot, right? You have to have some piece of value to offer people, because they have to want to come out and engage with you. No one is required to take any of our training. So we have to really add that value. We have to meet them where they are. And so it kind of like pulls together what you were saying, is the more we know about someone, whether that's through data or through conversations we've had with them or through research, right, the better we can meet their need. And the more value they'll get and keep coming back to us. So I think it's so important putting them at the center, right? And it makes all of our lives easier. Everyone kind of benefits from that.
Okay, let's transition to any of your recommendations. So, any books, podcast, courses, any input stuff that you'd like to share.
Yeah, actually, I have a couple podcast recommendations. So, especially on this like intersection of learning and product, there's a couple great episodes. There's the L&D podcast with David James. He talks a lot about this, and he has a great episode with Miles Runyon, who's been talking about this for years now, who comes from a product background and has kind of fused that with learning. And then also David James was on Sarah Canistra's podcast. So she has this great L&D Career Club podcast. They got into David's journey of how he became a chief learning officer. And in that, he talks a lot about how he's kind of fused a traditional learning background with this like product mindset and how that's kind of transformed his thinking. So those two episodes in particular were really helpful for me to kind of get my head wrapped around this. So that's great. And I also read a lot of product books because I just want to learn more about that. So one of the classics there is this book Inspired by Marty Kagan. So he talks about kind of how product teams work at these big tech companies that we all know, like Google and Amazon and Microsoft. Like, how do they actually build products? How do they think about research? Like, how do they think about creating something that people want and want to engage with? Right. And so, yeah, it's a great book and I recommend that as well.
Ooh. Okay. Ooh, I also see, can you tell us more about the Justin Welsh course? I follow him and interested in what you saw around that.
Yeah, this is actually, I'm glad we brought this up because being on social media, I think this is such an interesting trend is you're seeing all of these creators who are really leaning into courses, right? And putting out courses, right? So they're building these courses that they're then able to sell. And it's kind of like taking their unique skill set, whatever it is that makes them them and what they've been successful at, and capturing that knowledge and putting it into a course that they can go right and offer to people as a product essentially. And I just think it's such a cool way of kind of how we've democratized this, where all of these like individual creators are building these courses and they're so valuable that people are willing to go out and pay for them, right? In the way they would pay for a book or like, a movie or even like a subscription, And so it's really brought this energy to like these online courses. And you see these creators who are making a full-time living from creating courses. And of course, we all can't do that. But I just think what an interesting kind of twist in the learning space, right? That these courses are becoming popular. And one of my favorites is Justin Welsh. And he talks a lot about how he came from a consulting background and was in healthcare, but the people kept asking him about is how have you built your brand on LinkedIn, right? And so he kind of transitioned from I'm a healthcare, consultant to I'm a LinkedIn consultant because that's what my users are telling me. That's what they want to learn. And so he kept kind of focusing on that. And so I did get his course, The LinkedIn Operating System, and it really just breaks down how he thinks about LinkedIn, how he takes a structured approach to content creation, how he maintains a presence, how he works with clients and customers and how he thinks about those kinds of things. And it's really been helpful. And I love this about doing learning because I learned so much, but I'm also taking this like meta approach where I'm like, how did he design this course? How did he do the videos, right? What are the objectives? How is he framing this? And so I love doing those kinds of courses because I get to see what other creators are doing and get to see how people are just approaching like how they build learning and then how people engage with that.
One of the things that I hear in your description of how he approached it was he put the learner at the center. He really did listen to what he was consistently getting asked. And then he made something for that. Like he created the product based on those needs. And I think that is really powerful to your point of democratization of information, that you can go on and it's a pretty low overhead to be able to get something up and running and get a lot of feedback quickly at this point in time. So I'm really interested in that area too.
Yeah, Justin is a great example, right? Because he is, as far as I know, has a background in learning design or learning experience design or theory, right? What he did is exactly what we've talked about, right? He was humble. He didn't think he had all the answers. He talked to learners over and over again. He listened to what they had to say, and then he took what they wanted and analyzed their problems and built a solution for that, right? That drives his metrics, right? Yeah. So he did everything we're talking about today without having any background in learning or learning
Right.
design, right? He just followed this process, right? So you can do it, he can do it, right? And I think we can learn a lot.
Yeah, maybe we just need to get out of our own way, people.
Well, just listen to the
Yeah.
learners, right? They will tell you what they want, and if you give them what they want, they'll be happy. Like they'll get value out of that.
I really do just appreciate your time and your expertise and all the different learnings that you've had and insights. I think that our audience is going to take away a lot from this episode. I'd love to end with where people can find you, what kind of conversations you like to have, or what things people can reach out to you regarding.
Yeah, best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find. You can just look up my name there, Chris Skees. And we haven't really touched on this a lot, but I've been really into mentoring in the last year or two and kind of getting to work with people who are new to L&D, who are trying to kind of navigate this field that can have all these different areas and twists and turns, and just helping them think about their career and how they grow their career, right? How they can navigate this world of L&D. And so, yeah, I do every 2 weeks I do an office hour. So I just have an open space where people can come in and kind of build community, talk to each other, talk to me, ask questions. So check out my page on LinkedIn for more details about that.
Chris, that's awesome. That's so generous to share your insights again and expertise. So thank you so much. I look forward to staying connected as new internet friends out there on the LinkedIns. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.